poster child for making mistakes and still standing, I think that would be me. I hope that people, both rookies and veterans, can learn, because there's a lot of booby traps out there in healthcare, and paying attention to details is important. Barry Block always emphasizes that when I submit stuff, editing, lighting, everything. And obviously when we're working with patients and when we're working with hospitals, when we're working with insurance, all those details are important, and it's easy to get distracted.
What we got here is a failure to communicate.
They used to have what they call trunk cases. Trunk cases, you couldn't do it now because everything is on the EMR. There's much more duplication of medical records. Trunk cases were taking those bad cases, those bad IM nails, and then just throwing them in a trunk, or burning them, or having them mysteriously go away. I guess we see that with insurance companies as well. They don't call them trunk cases, they just call them denials. So we never want to bury our head in the sand. We want to practice with integrity. We all have lapses, minor moments of not being our best, but we just have to keep striving to be our best. I want to take an example where medicine really hasn't learned from the airline industry. There was a very famous airline crash in Portland, Oregon. It was United Flight 173. And that crash was the genesis of why we have more detailed assessment of the black boxes. And the black boxes basically tell us the story. They give us a signature of what happened during that flight. And there's a very similar parallel to the multi-factors of running a successful airline takeoff and landing to the medical surgery and mortality, various things that can happen to our patients. In this particular case, there was no team approach to what was happening in the cockpit. So what happened is they were having trouble with the landing gear. The crew was trying to tell them, Captain, we're also getting low on fuel. And the captain was so assertive that they ran out of fuel and they crashed. So a concept came, which is a crew resource management, and I think that could apply to medicine as well. I would call it DR, doctor resource management, because we're in a culture where maybe in a good facility, I know, like for instance, Dr. Wines works in a Maryland facility that I visited. CME thing that he does, I think that's later in October. And they work together, but in certain situations and with having a smaller practice where maybe the training isn't up to the same that you would want, those communications can break down. And I always kind of liken it not only with comprehension, but even listening. Being able to actively listen. It's almost like that game we played when we were kids, where you have two styrofoam cups with the string attached. You're getting this muted, muffled thing. So if a call comes in during a critical thing, and it might even be not patient-related, but just payment-related. It could be you're giving them a dimensions, you're gloved up. Maybe you don't like to dictate your notes because you're going to forget later the dimensions of the wound. And your assistant puts inches instead of centimeters, or doesn't put the depth, so all kinds of things to happen. So how would we maybe solve that? Maybe have the program require you to put all three dimensions, because now we'll get audited if we miss a dimension, potentially. And it all comes back to the black box. It's a very insulated environment. Does anybody know what temperature water boils at in Celsius? Somebody knows.
100.
100. How about Fahrenheit?
212.
These black boxes go up to 1100 Celsius for 30 minutes with 3400 G's of resistance. I don't think that, unfortunately, we have something that tight in our office. I've heard of people talk about using a camera to divulge that. I think generally it's a good idea to do that. I've heard of doctors using evaluation of their own staff, just running an iPhone, just listening to the conversations that happen. In this day and age, you gotta have like consent issues if a patient is, off camera, so it gets a little complicated even when you're trying to do self-assessments to see what's breaking down in your office. The two things happen simultaneously. I had a thing just recently, not related to medical, where I'm putting my bike into the car, and I'm getting on the other side to get the bike in the back of the car. I didn't have a bike rack. Meanwhile, my front tire's against a tree, and some car comes and just lays the horn on me. I got distracted. I left the tire there. I end up, reparking the car, and like, where's my tire? So I had to run down 10 city blocks with my bike like a unicycle. Buffalo landing where the crew was distracted by a minor distraction, which mismanaged a stall. Does anybody know why they do a stall when you're flying? And I didn't know this till I just talked to a pilot recently. So when you have a lot of turbulence, they'll run a stall to get you quickly out of that air pocket. But it's pretty scary if you're not used to it. I was on a flight down one of the smaller jets, which is why I don't like those smaller commuter ones down in Miami during hurricane season. The stewardesses were crying and people were kissing the tarmac after they rolled the stairs up. But that is why they do the stalls, but they didn't manage it properly, and that was the problem. Here's one we talked about metric to English. They had this Air Canada ran out of fuel due to a conversion error. Luckily, the pilot was able to fly them to a safe landing. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So, according to this book, I'd recommend this book, The Surprise and Truth About Success. Each event that we do in the OR, in our office, has a particular signature or trajectory. So you can almost predict that if you don't have a backup system or some means of writing and you're relying on just verbal, that there's going to be a problem. So that's where we get to this doctor resource management. The problem is these resources are expensive and time consuming, and we're constantly being barraged, and that's why we're all in this situation. Communication again. This is just, I'll go through this quickly. This was a series of things that happened with the case that I mentioned. I asked for the consent to be translated in Spanish. It never happened. I was just podiatry. I wasn't, orthopedic, so I got resourced out. The consent form that I had, I booked it as a debridement. They booked it as an IND. I never saw the consent form. It was back with anesthesia. Situation, they get the patient back from the gurney, and next thing you know, we're starting the case. Didn't matter. The patient never sued me, but that was used against me about the proper consent. Domino effects, Board of Medicine. Next thing, insurance panel reviews, morale. Patient care suffers, people resort to drugs. We had the highest suicide rate last year for attempted, like just last year, with physicians. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they successfully killed themselves, but the most attempts and suicides last year, the highest rate. Stress on a marriage, stress on a family. Psychology of tells, because it tells us a lot of our interaction with our patients, our staff, people that come in and promise us things, and which lead to audits, pharma. We all know this. People that avoid direct eye contact, grabbing a necklace, all these little tics that people have, touching their mouth. You're looking at, if you ever watched The Sopranos, Tony Soprano was an expert at reading people. And sometimes you'll just hear this like wash of whatever, and like garbled words, and he's just watching people and watching the little tics and seeing if they're telling the truth. Who's got the real smile? The guy on your right or the guy on your left?
Left.
And why?
His eyes are crinkling.
The there's an ocular twitch or movement that happens when you have a real smile. If you're faking it, it's not going to be natural. And you can also see the smile lines are a little bit different too. These schemers will come into my office. I can't believe just recently I had somebody come in. It was somebody connected to somebody else in a KOL, and he's working for another company, and he wanted to get me $100,000 to Medicare quadrilayer amnion graft. And I was like, have you read the New York Times? People also say, honestly, I truthfully, to be honest with you, that can sometimes be also a tell. They're trying to build up. So in other words, what you said before, you weren't being honest, but now you're being honest with me with what you just said, for your clothes on the sale. I think there was an episode where Paulie in The Sopranos was trying to pull the wool over Tony, and he was like, Tony, I swear on my mother's wig. Liars will over-explain the details of a story, and to get it right in their head, they will say it in chronological order. They can't do it out of sequence because it's scripted. They answer questions parroting your own words. State Farm Insurance, I just got this rope-a-dope where they tell you everything's all right until you have a claim, and then, oh, where's your sump pump coverage? Sump pump coverage? You never told me that. A liar will change the subject to the liar, and if they relax, they're likely lying. Somebody that's not lying, because they're like, oh wow, we're off the heat now. Somebody that's not lying will just be confused that you just changed the subject. The liar is waiting for that break. They're waiting till they're off the hook. Go with your gut. We all know this. So many of us, even now, don't go with our gut. We know what the answer is. We already know what the answer is, but somehow there's competing things making our decision. She would take my bank statements while I was doing nursing homes or doing the surgery. She would literally make color copies, get whiteout, delete the lines, and I had all my personal and business checking in one account. I never saw those missing checks. She was constantly writing checks, embezzling me for less than $1,000. They never checked the signatures. What I didn't know at the time is the bank was liable for that. I found that out, unfortunately, after the fact, and it was already past. But what was funny is somebody called me, an OBGYN, about this woman after the fact, and I said, don't hire that person. And I had to be careful. I said, I would not make the hire. Cash in the till is not adding up. There's a lot worse. Oh, here's something that happened to me. I had an arena football player come in, and we did a surgery in the office, and it was to the tune of $2,500 with some hammer toes and a few other things. And we had a problem with our software with the swipe for the debit card, and we didn't want to have this poor guy have to pay 4% for a Visa. So we used the debit card, but we have to manually plug it in. The debit card company PNC calls the patient. They say, was that a legit charge? And it sure was not. It wasn't. No, I never went there. We produced a signing. We did not have a receipt, and that was on us. We did not have a written receipt. We produced a sign-in. We sent medical notes, the fact that he was there. Visa arbitrated for PNC Bank. I got back a statement, big capital letters, fraud. Well, if it's fraud, why don't you take me to jail? We've tried to skip trace the guy to collections. Who knows? So maybe I need to hire Tony Soprano for this guy. Things that are hard to do, changing passwords, it's difficult for us. I can't remember my password. I'm constantly resetting my passwords because I have so many different passwords. Clawback insurance for those claims that you were told, or local medical review policies that get changed after the fact, like happened with the placenta orthopedic injections recently. But there is some redundancy there because our admin defense should cover those as well. I'm probably going to do the General District Court with State Farm because it was a 15,000 in damages, but it's a long process. It's a long process, and they're banking on the fact that you'll just give up. T-codes can be tricky, and what I just learned for T-codes, number one, it goes down to not only Novitas, but what subset of Novitas that you're in. So we're in the JL in Northern Virginia, so there's a 2-letter prefix. I know down here a lot of people are in Palmetto. This is just a new technology that came out that I am using. I'm leasing it judiciously. I don't want to overutilize it. I've heard of a practice in Kansas that billed almost $500,000 with these 2 codes. So then this is a Medicare situation. So there's a T code for wounds and a T code for musculoskeletal pain. But it did pay in the Novitas region that I'm in. Both codes paid. And the fact that you don't have an LCD doesn't mean that it's not in progress. But you have to decide, do you want to be on the ride wave of that, or do you want to wait until 2 years or so? It just depends on your risk tolerance in terms of these types of things. And tying up a lot of capital is another thing. So you have to look at the debt ratios and the interest rates being as high as they are, particularly right now. We all owe a lot to people whose shoulders we've stood on before. Debbie Turchia passed too early, I guess at 53. She used to do the academic coordination. One of her big lectures that she had, that she flew out several times, was Gerard View. I have a little clip that Mike Downey did that if you can get yourself in that spirit of service, we'll do better for our patients, as opposed to it's another, and that's the problem too, is we get on the hamster wheel. So it's difficult sometimes to relax with our patients. Yeah, good.
And I remember one time we fell behind on some of our discharge summaries in the hospital. We have those in a timely fashion. And Gerard came up to us about 7 o'clock at night. And normally back then we admitted everybody. And, the funny story, I finished that residency in 1986. And outpatient surgery really became popular in 1985. And I remember when it first happened, we thought, oh my God, you're going to kill these people. You're going to send them home the same day you do surgery on them? And we admitted everybody back then. So we had, at times we had 50 or 60 people in the hospital from foot surgery. And so anyway, Gerard came up to us about 7 o'clock one evening when we were behind in these discharge summaries, and he said, when do you guys think you might be done tonight? And we said, well, we got this and that to do, we got to still do rounds, we got a couple more H&Ps to do, probably 10 or 11. He said, okay, so do you think you could meet me at my apartment at 11 o'clock? And he said, sure. So we met him at around 11:15. He opened the door, and you could smell the Chinese food right away. He made us a big feast, and he and Jeff Boger were there. We sat down and said, come on in. They gave us a beer, we're eating Chinese food. We got done, and they said, you guys feel pretty good now? And we said, yes, sir. And he said, well, you're way behind the discharge summary. So tonight you're going back to the hospital, and you're going to finish all the discharge summaries before dawn. And I remember we finished about 5:15 in the morning, and we had to be at the hospital anyway at 5:30. So in essence, we didn't sleep that night. But he was an intense person, but at the same token, he scrubbed everything. And I think it's something that anybody who's in a residency can really take to heart. If you're in our model today, a 3-year program, mine was a 3-year program back in the day. And if you're a 3rd-year resident, or even more, a 4th-year resident, or even a fellow, and you're working with lesser residents, like 1st year or 2nd year, it certainly should be something where you can become a teacher. You should be in the operating room teaching those 1st and 2nd year residents, along with the attending surgeon. I think that's something that Gerard really dwelled on, that in many programs we've gotten away from. The 3rd year, the 4th year, the fellow just goes in for their case. And if it's a 1st year case, they're off doing something else. And I think there's a lot lost there. I think everybody should scrub every case.
Thank you, everybody.